Action. Hey, Leah.
Hello, beautiful. How are you?
I am great. You're looking good.
Thank you. I've got my Leo charms on.
I see. It's so nice.
It was actually a present from a former neighbor of mine. She was cleaning out her jewelry box and she invited, we didn't have like a big place. It was like the ground floor and then the floor above it. So she invited the neighbors from up above to come down and take any jewelry they liked before she brought it to Goodwill. And I saw this necklace and I was like, yes, I'll take that one.
How cool.
Connect with my Leo sign.
Yes. Nice. That was nice. I love that because it's like repurposing. If you're not going to use it anymore, give it to somebody who can love it as much as you used to.
I know. I find that in my closet, I have about 10% of my clothing that I wear just on autopilot over and over again. It's like my go-to stuff. And then the rest of the stuff I might wear once a year, maybe.
Yeah.
Once every 5 years, maybe. And so I feel like if you can just get rid of that stuff that for whatever reason you're not wearing, it just makes more space for you to do the stuff that is meaningful. Like taking care of stuff takes time and energy.
It does.
Get rid of it.
That is so true. Same thing with my closet, especially now that I got my prosperities going. I'm always wearing a prosperity, so I hardly ever wear anything else unless like I had a speaking engagement. Well, I still wore my prosperity. I just put a blazer over it.
Yeah. It's funny. Like you think about, Steve Jobs, I think Zuckerberg is maybe the same way.
Yep. Okay, Turner.
They just wear, the same shirt, the same pants, the same look because your decision-making muscle is limited. And once you drain it out, making those little decisions, you won't have energy left to make the big important decisions. And I've kind of been the same way. I think people probably notice I wear black a lot because you don't have to worry about matching. It just kind of automatically matches with everything.
Whatever.
And so much of my clothing is just black for that reason. It's easy. You don't have to expend energy on those decisions.
Yes, I like it. Just streamline the decision making. Yes. So let's get into today's show. So everybody, I'm Kiné and I'm here with my good friend Leah Marshall. And today we're going to talk a lot about self-love. And then we're going to sprinkle some other topics kind of in there. So self-love will be the meat, and then the other stuff will be the gravy.
Yeah. I think what I love so much about this interview is it's coming from a bit of an unexpected place. So this was a conversation between Steve Weatherford. I'm actually not a big football person, so I hadn't heard of him, but he's a Super Bowl champion. He played for the Saints, was in the NFL for 10 years, punter, has since become a very successful entrepreneur, fitness influencer. And then his conversation is with Mylett, who's also a big influencer in entrepreneurship and business as well. And I think what struck me was this was an extremely honest, vulnerable conversation between two men who, on the surface level, if you look at them, they're known for their athletic achievements and their financial achievements. And it's kind of like the opposite topics that you'd expect from two people who have this kind of imposing physical presence like these two men do. What about you? What kind of struck you about it?
Exactly. And it's funny because I sent the video to several different men and that all football fans, and they were like, yeah, I kind of know him. So it wasn't even like you don't have to be a football player for him to maybe have gone unnoticed especially if like you're not a Saints fan or you don't pay attention to putters or kickers or whatever. So, and he talks about that kind of in the video. So I felt like, one, that was a challenge where you're in a place where you're a celebrity, but you might not be as celebrity as some of your counterparts. And then I was really, really, I guess the word is pleasantly surprised at how like they loved on each other. like they were like, dude, I've been meaning to meet you, and
Mhm.
I'm so glad we're getting together. Like I just like, because when guys meet each other, a lot of times they're like, you still wearing that old sweater? Like, oh, looks like you gained some weight. Like that's how they talk to each other. And they
Mhm.
don't do what we do where we just are like, oh, nice necklace. Oh, hey, gorgeous. Like they
Mhm.
don't do that. They're like, oh, you still married to this guy? That's what they say to their wives and stuff. So they are quick to challenge each other or compete with each other or down each other, even in a loving way. But
Mhm.
these guys didn't do that. So I was also kind of moved by, and they were vulnerable, but they were vulnerable with each other in the way that they accepted and kind of moved into the conversation.
Yeah. And one of the things, so Ed was the interviewer, and Steve was invited to be a guest on the show. And Ed kicked it off and he said, the reason this interview is going to change the world is because if a guy with your life, Super Bowl champ, beautiful wife, incredible kids, amazing achievement, can get all of that success, but you arrive there not loving yourself, none of that success will matter. And I thought that kind of summarized up the conversation in a powerful way. I think that, towards the beginning of the interview, Steve was talking about the only time he got recognition when he was growing up was in sports because he had ADD and he couldn't sit still in class. But when he competed athletically, he always got recognition, got awards, got accolades. And so he kept building that quote unquote muscle, that sports muscle, that sports achievement muscle, and it became extremely developed, potentially overdeveloped. And his identity was so tied to that, he even said, when people told me they loved me, I didn't accept it because I didn't love myself.
Mm-hmm.
He couldn't fully see his friends or accept love from them until he could see and love himself. And I thought of, so many of us, when we're 4, 5, 6, we get accolades and recognition for a certain thing we do. Maybe it's because we're well behaved and we're not ruffling feathers. Maybe it's because we play the violin well. And so we keep developing that muscle. And then suddenly we wake up and we're 30 and we're an amazing violin player, but there are all these other areas of our life that are, we haven't focused on as a result of that. Was curious if you could relate.
Yeah, I recently was I spoke at an event and there were a room full of women there, probably 20 or so women.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of this conference, there was the sharing portion of the day. Most of the women there talked about how they did so much like they got great grades, like they were awesome at getting good grades. And they were all physicians and dentists and lawyers and all like 6-figure high-powered women. So they had that part down, but then they felt like maybe they had on this mask because they didn't really know who they were. They didn't really love themselves and they just didn't have the confidence outside of like maybe they were a great dentist or maybe they were a great doctor and they had confidence there, but they didn't have confidence in just being them. And that like struck me because I was like, whoa. And then I'd already watched this video and listened to them and, combining what Steve was saying with what these women were saying. And I'm like, wow, people are really hurting out in this world, which they talked about like the faking it for the gram. People are hurting so much that they don't want you to think that they don't have it all together.
Yeah.
So if you're not perfect, you're not a person.
Yeah. And, it's interesting. I was thinking about, so both Lewis Howes, who we've talked about, he's a podcaster, he's a lot of things, but let's just say he's a very successful podcaster. And Steve, they both, were labeled as either dyslexic or having ADD in school. They both were, didn't get great grades, struggled academically. And those two men are two of the most like articulate, high achieving people, that I really respect and admire. Lewis has written, despite being dyslexic or being labeled as dyslexic, has written two best-selling books, or at least one best-selling book, New York Times best-selling books. Steve is, I mean, if you listen to him, the way he's able to put ideas together, his vocabulary, he's obviously extremely bright and intelligent. And it just struck me as so interesting. Both men ended up excelling overwhelmingly in sports and athletics, you know, on a national and international scale. And it just struck me so much, was interesting that because initially they got recognition for their athletics, they just focused on that area. And yet as they've kind of become more well-rounded and become comfortable in their own skin and started dabbling in other areas like becoming authors, or Steve ended up writing an ebook that was wildly successful. It's just interesting to see, like, once we let go of like the 5-year-old Steve who was told by his teacher, you know, he can't sit still and therefore he'll never amount to anything academically. Like, once we sever ourselves from that old story, it's so interesting what we're able to achieve.
Yeah, I'm actually a big fan of playing to your strengths. I don't want you to stay there, you know, just not get anywhere else, but play to your strengths. Do what you do well and get your confidence around your strengths. I'm a big fan of that. And I teach that in my work, my prosperity therapy. I teach that in my work. Play to your strengths, do well in that, and then branch off to whatever else you want to do next. It's just that you can't begin to believe that you can't do the other things. To see what was happening. I know so many successful people that are dyslexic and who have ADD. Most of my successful friends actually have ADD, me included. I don't claim that. Like, you'll never hear me say I am ADD. That's not something I claim. I don't even claim dyslexia. I don't claim any of the titles that I could have been given.
Yeah.
Also, I didn't talk for the first like 2.5 years of my life. Like, no words, no like Baba, cookie, mama, none of that. I didn't do that, no words at all. And so I could have gotten a label for that at some point. A doctor could have said, oh, she's this, or she's mute, or whatever they could have decided, which would have breathed that into my life. But my mother, the doctor, they just didn't give me any titles. And they're like, just like, let's see what happens. She don't want to talk. Let's wait for her to get ready to talk. So the titles and the labels that we're given sometimes hold us back. Now, I do know some people need a label so they can say, that's what I have. Now I can move forward. Some people do that.
Yeah.
But really, most times when we place a label on ourselves, it gives us limiting beliefs, because people with ADD can't do this and people with dyslexia can't do this. Okay, but what can they do? And I think that's where the shift happened at some point for all of them, is that they focused on what they could do. Because people with ADD, maybe they have a lot of energy, so they can bust through like athletically because they have a bunch of energy. Cool. Yeah. Let's use that. Same thing, people with dyslexia, a lot of times they have this creative side. Most of the time they have some sort of like creative side to them that I see them use and really excel in. Yeah. So just focus on what people with that thing, that label, can do rather than what they can't do. And I was so moved that he finally got there and was able to figure that out. I was also moved that he continued to say, this was my stuff. Like, I took this. The society didn't give me this. My parents didn't give me this. These things were happening, right? My parents were saying whatever they were saying, but it was the meaning that I gave it. He totally owned his stuff.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I wanted to go back because I was just thinking about what you said. And I think what struck me is it wasn't that Lewis or that Steve weren't smart. I think that it was that they didn't fit into this very confined, what's the right word? Confined like definition for how you need to show your intelligence or show your smarts, you know? I think within like the school system, it does tend to preference girls over boys. like sit in a seat for 8 hours, like those types of things. I also thought back to my own elementary school experience. I'll never forget. I was in first grade and I was always the slowest to do any academic task. And I had a teacher who had us like write in cursive, passages on the board, and we had to just copy them in cursive. And it felt like Mount Everest to me, and I would finish like half of the thing and everyone else had been done for 20 minutes. And I was constantly getting in trouble. And this teacher the only thing I remember about her were her eyes were like fireballs. Like she had this almost supernatural evil quality to me that I still remember to this day. And it wasn't until a friend's mom approached my mom in the grocery store and said, "I'm so sorry, Mrs. So-and-so has been so hard on Leah." And my mom, I didn't tell my mom this. My mom's like, "What are you talking about?" And so my mom learned, and they ended up sending me to like the school social worker because I was starting to have anxiety, at that age. It was like super stressful. And, it's interesting because now you look at me and like learning, like I take learning vacations. Like I don't go to Cabo. I don't travel the world. Like what I get excited about is like a conference.
Right. Unless the conference is in Cabo.
That's another story. But, it's funny. It's like we have this confined box that we're forced to fit in. And I think the key is like knowing yourself. And like one of my favorite ways to learn is podcasts or audiobooks, because I learn really well by listening.
Me too.
Whereas other people, it might be videos or it might be like physical books or, ebooks. So I think the key is like learn yourself, know what works for you, and don't feel like you need to fit into this confined box. Like, do your own thing, do it your way. I feel like that was a little off track, but I wanted to share that because it made me think of, again, like going back to Steve, who has said like, you're not doing well academically. And then you see him today and he's so like self-aware, articulate, successful in business, like just so well-rounded. And it's just interesting how long that negative label stuck with him, and until he really, kind of examined it and saw that it was just someone's opinion. It wasn't reality, that he was able to kind of like push past that and go into an entirely new area career-wise.
Yeah. And one of the things that he said that jumped out at me was around football. And he said that I think Reggie Bush was to one side of him and Drew Brees was to the other side of him. And there was a part of him that was like, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
Kind of like, me and these guys, like, am I supposed to be here?
Yeah.
I was telling a patient of mine about this, and I was saying, because he was describing a similar situation. So I told him this story, and I was like, now there's two ways that he could see that. He could see that as the one he did, like, what am I doing here? Or, wow, look at me. I'm amongst the greats. I'm up here with the greats. Rather than seeing, I'm not supposed to be here, but I'm in the right place. And look who I'm around. We're all in the right place. But we don't always see it that way because somehow society hasn't given us permission, because there is a box that you need to fit in. And if you don't neatly fit into that box, then you're odd or weird or strange or whatever. And somehow people don't want to be odd or weird or strange. They want to be normal, right? And I'm like, well, what the heck is normal? What you're really saying is you want to be ordinary.
I love that you said that. I'm curious. Okay, so what factors would make someone go into that situation and think, wow, I've made it, I'm among greats or greatness, versus I'm a total imposter, I don't belong here? What do you think it is in terms of mindset or upbringing or training that would make someone think one versus the other?
So I think a big part of it is what you said before, know thyself. So if they grew up knowing themselves, like, I'm good at this. Remember what I said earlier about yes, I have dyslexia. People with dyslexia are good at this thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So instead of focusing on, yes, this is me, this is who I am, and I'm great because I have these strengths, the focus was on, I have to do this because I have this. And so if we were able to shift the focus to what is awesome about you, then you have this platform to start from, in this awesome platform. So most people are not starting from awesome. They're starting from, oh, I'm at the bottom, I'm nothing, and I've got to do something to become awesome, rather than I'm just awesome in being born. I just was born awesome. So because he had to first build up to being awesome, you can never be sure if you've done enough, right? You're like, was that enough? Did I meet awesome yet? Did I get there? So I think if you start from awesome, which is knowing yourself, like you said, and then being clear on what your strengths and your challenges are, and then your challenges not being such a big deal because you realize we all have them. Everybody has a challenge. So Drew Brees has a challenge. It's just his strengths overshadow whatever challenge he has.
Right. And it's possible Drew Brees thought the same thing, like I'm next to Reggie Bush,
Yep.
But, Steve mentioned an interesting point about trying to reprogram the way he thinks so that he's operating from a place of love versus self-hatred and fear. And I think when he had that thought, that imposter syndrome, when he was in the locker room, that was probably because he was operating from that place of, I'm only worthy if I'm able to execute X or achieve at Y level, versus operating from a place of self-love. I'm not sure what operating from a place of self-love would look like in athletics or in sports.
Yeah, it's tough because they are bound to, and he mentioned this in the video, that they are bound to criticism. Right. You didn't do this, you didn't do this, you didn't throw the ball right. And then you got the whole fans criticizing you. And nobody is going to compliment you when you do your job, right? You got to touch. Of course you got to touch. That's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Right. So you don't get accolades. And if you do, you get them early on. And then once you get them, it's like you're done with that. And you start to tune out because you're like, of course I got to touch down. That's what I do. And so in sports, it's tough because in real life, self-love looks like, I am great at this and I'm not so great at that, but because I do this well, I'm good. Self-love also looks like I don't really have to do anything, but in sports, you do. You do have to do this. You have to do these things. And so because you're sort of bound by that, plus this is the most important part of it, there's this sense of competition. If the only person you were competing with was you, which they mentioned this, I just want to be better than I was yesterday. Oh no, that was Rachel Hollis who said that, not this video. So I just want to be better than I was yesterday. I just want to be, I just want to be the best me. Every best me I can be. To wake up today, I learned something new yesterday. I'm going to apply that to today, and I'm going to learn something else, and I'm going to be even more awesome. So if you can do that, which I believe you can do in sports, but that's not what they teach you in sports. But if you can do that, only compete with yourself, then that's self-love. Because you're like, I'm loving myself so much that I'm going to be greater than I was yesterday. And I'm going to hold myself and give myself permission to not be what I'm going to be a week from now. Yeah.
Do you think do you think that happens in like the highest levels of sports? Do you think that there's anyone who has that mindset, or is that almost impossible?
Well, I've been watching LeBron James has the new show called The Shop.
Okay.
And this is not in sports, but in entertainment. Drake was on his show. And one of the guys did to me sound like he had that kind of self-love where he was not competing with, or he wasn't trying to show up as an athlete as much as he was trying to show up as a man. And as a good man. And Drake talked about being a good man. And he had some trouble with Kanye, where Kanye kind of like stabbed him in the back. And then wrote a song about him. And he almost replied, but then he was like, I'm not going to do that. That's not where I am. And he called LeBron and he said, look, man, this is what's happened. He's come at me. Normally, I would compete and I would go right back at him because our battle rhyming is what I do. But I don't feel like I should respond. And LeBron was like, I'm never going to be upset with you. Like, whatever you choose, you're my brother. I stand behind you and do whatever you choose. And I thought that was so awesome and special because, one, he gave him permission to make his own decision and not like, man, you better go back and you better take him down. And because that's what we could do for each other is like, yeah. And so I like that part of their friendship. But also I liked that there was something already inside of Drake. He loved himself so much that he didn't have to tell the world how awful Kanye was for him to look good. He was like, none of that is true.
Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head. And we've just come full circle back to self-love, because everything that Steve talked about was externally driven, you know, whether it was the accolades from the sports or you know, whatever else might come externally that would give him recognition and validation. I've heard a couple interviews with elite athletes, and I know Phil Jackson was super into meditation, Tony Dungy, I think, as well. And I think it's all about, I had heard an interview, I think it was Drew Manning the famous quarterback?
That would be Peyton Manning.
Maybe Peyton Manning. One of the Mannings, I think. I had heard it.
Peyton, and then I think Eli is like the next.
Maybe it was Eli, one of them. Someone.
Correct us, man, please.
Right. But what I heard is, like, whether they win or they lose, there's almost this sense of calm, and it's like, it's just a game, and, you know, you show up and you play, and almost like a detachment from the outcome, which has a very strong kind of meditation background foundation. And I almost think it comes back to that. It's like, no matter what happens externally, there's a strong sense internally of, I'm worthy, I'm enough. You know, the outcome of X game isn't going to affect how I feel about myself.
Yeah. In that same episode that I was talking about with LeBron and Drake, they talked about performance psychology, and it's so internal. It's so in your mind. I just posted a couple of days ago on Instagram that it's not that your mind is thinking. Like, some people think, oh, I can't meditate because I'm thinking too much. It's not that your mind is thinking. It's what your mind is thinking. So if you could monitor and manage the thoughts that and the messages that you're receiving, you have to do, some of the meditation is to put up a force field so that you block out some of those negative messages and don't let them penetrate you. And then, because that's that external stuff. But that also means that the compliments can't penetrate you either, which is like the 4 agreements. Don't take anything personal. So if you're not letting the negative affect you, not letting the positive affect you, none of that external stuff, the only thing that affects you is the internal God inside of you, whatever higher power you feel like you were created, even science. If you just let that come up and come out, then that's the peace. And it doesn't matter whether you lose or win, because you just always feel like a winner.
Yeah. I love that. One of the quotes that really stuck with me was when Steve said, money doesn't make you happy. A marriage won't make you happy. Having kids won't make you happy. Winning a Super Bowl won't make you happy. What will make you happy is when you look in the mirror and love the person that's looking back at you. And I thought it was a super profound, true thing to say. And I think also, going back to what you just said, I think what you described, that place of self-love, is something that needs to be really cultivated. You know, if you look at a lot of our lives, you know, it's, you get up, you go to work, you work out, you have dinner, rinse and repeat, and then on the weekends it's like Sunday fun day. You know, there's not a lot built in to our society that's like, you know, cultivate that self-love, have it be intrinsic, have it be from within, you know, don't operate from the outside in, operate from the inside out.
Right. And the last thing that I would say is kind of on the heels of what you were saying with Steve saying this won't bring you happiness, this won't bring you happiness. It's sort of a culmination. So if you have the happiness, the other stuff brings you satisfaction, and satisfaction is a big part of happiness, because you're going to be happy, right? Oh, yay, today's great. I woke up in the morning. But then there's some things you want to accomplish to maintain that happiness. It doesn't create the happiness, but it could help you maintain the happiness, that satisfaction. Winning the Super Bowl alone won't bring you happiness. But if you work on the self-love and you win a Super Bowl and you know what that means to you, it doesn't mean like, I won a Super Bowl. You love me, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, I won a Super Bowl. This was what I wanted to do. I did it. Now the thing that I wanted to do becomes the thing that I did. I'm satisfied.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you, because you're operating from the inside out. You have that foundation of self-love, and then you're going out into the world with that, versus going into the world looking for, validation, recognition, and having that be your foundation.
Right. It's almost like, and I don't have an analogy, and I almost always do, especially when I'm in session, but it's almost like you're working with, it's almost like you have a container and you're trying to fill it up with happiness. Like, oh, let's put in a Super Bowl. Let's put in a wife. Let's put in some money. Then do we have happiness? Let's stir it up some more, right? Well, we really need to work from the thing growing, kind of like a seed, I guess, like it just grows. And inside the seed is already happiness. Already inside the acorn is a freaking tree. So if you just plant it and water it, then the whole tree comes out. So, hey, there goes my analogy. So it's kind of like trying to pour everything into the pot, just like let it unfold, because it's already inside of you. Mm-hmm. You might like mess it up if you try to put too much.
Yeah. I think to access, though, you have to strip away a lot.
Just like the acorn, just like the seed.
Yeah.
That shell falls away, and all of a sudden you have this beautiful blossom. Yep, you do. Well, but you wouldn't have to strip away if we didn't get those negative messages. See, what happens is, and I was watching this happen just a couple days ago, kids playing, and people were saying, sit down, don't do that. You don't do that in here. You don't say that. Don't say those things. Like they're correcting. And the kids are like, what? Why don't we do that in here? Like, what is this? What place is this that we can't have fun in? And so we limit them. And then they're like, well, I better not do that. I'll get in trouble. I better not do that. I'll get in trouble. And so we start putting these like limits on ourselves. What can I do that I don't get in trouble? Mm-hmm. What can I do that I don't get in trouble? And so you really wouldn't have much to strip away if society didn't pour all this crap on top of you, telling you what you can't do because you have dyslexia and ADD, and because this is the grocery store or the church or wherever it is that you're supposed to be kind and nice and sweet.
And it's so interesting you brought that up, because one of my favorite speakers from Summit of Greatness was Dr. Shafali, who's a parent. She's a PhD psychotherapist, parenting expert is what she's known for. I think Oprah called her the most interesting guest she's ever had.
Oh, wow. Wait, that was on the Oprah show.
Not exaggerating. But I'm not a parent myself, but I've been totally enthralled by her videos, because what she talks about is so much of parenting is ego-based. It's us being afraid of how we're going to be seen by society or by our peers. Yes. And we vomit that all over our kids. And then they grow up and they vomit that all over their kids.
Yes, yes, totally.
Yeah. So check out it's Shefali, Dr. Shafali. She's amazing. I actually wanted to have her be our next conversation, but drum roll, Red Table Talk is coming back October 22nd. So I feel like we should probably hit that.
No, let's do it. We have a whole week. We can do her, and then we can do the following week, since it's going to happen on the 22nd anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds awesome. So coming at you next, Dr. Shafali. I'll link up. I've started to create a playlist of her videos. She also has several different books, if you're more of a book person, Conscious Parent and Awakened Family. But she's really magnificent. So,
Well, we'll like to thank Ed Mylett and Steve Weatherford for giving us some cool content, for showing us that men can be vulnerable too, and that self-love is not easy, but it's possible.
I love it. You summarized it perfectly.
Great. See you guys.